Welcome to the Dad Nation podcast, where men go from good to great in their life and love. Now more than ever, our world needs strong, compassionate, and courageous men, because we believe that when the dad gets better, the whole family wins. And this movement is called Dad Nation, but ultimately this is for the wives and the children and the generations to come, because we believe that every wife and child deserves a father who is pursuing greatness. Listen, I am your host, Mitchell Osman, and I am so grateful and I'm humbled that you've chosen to spend your most precious resource, which is your time, with me today. It is a good day to record a podcast, my friends, because today we're going to be talking about a topic that I'm particularly passionate about because I'm kind of a geek. We're going to be talking about how to form great habits and how to kick bad ones. A lot of the stuff that I'm going to be sharing from has been inspired by a gentleman named James Clear, who wrote a book called The Atomic Habits. And so if you like what you hear today, I strongly advise you to purchase his book and read it, because it's going to go into much more detail of what I'm going to share today. But I'm going to give you the Cliff's Notes and some of the big takeaways. But I promise you this: today's episode will be practical. Today's episode will be tactical. You're going to have information that you can take away to be able to implement everything that you want in order to form great habits and to kick the bad ones. Okay? And I'm going to teach you what to do when all feels hopeless and you feel like quitting, you feel like throwing in the towel. I'm going to give you a couple tips on how to stay on track and stay focused with those new habits you're trying to form, or stay on track with kicking the old habits you're trying to kick. So a lot of us use the words motivation. We use the word discipline. We often use those words interchangeably. And in the context of forming good habits or kicking bad ones, we'll often use those words like, I need more motivation. I need more discipline to do this. And the common mistake people make is we use these terms interchangeably, but in reality, they're very different. For example, when you say, I need more motivation to do this, that means something very different than I need more discipline to do this. And when you put them in that context, you can see exactly what I mean. And I hear people say this all the time, that I'm just not motivated, or I struggle with motivation. Well, listen, of course you do, okay? Everybody does. Every single person struggles with motivation, because motivation is very fleeting. It comes and goes on a whim. So these two are, like I said, are the terms are used interchangeably, but they mean very different things and serve different purposes, right? So I want you to think about this. Motivation is short-term, okay? And it's a feeling. Discipline is long-term, and it's a bit of a practice. There are key differences between the two. So I want you to think about, we all have experiences probably with lighting a fire, or we've sat around a campfire when somebody's been lighting a fire. So in this context, motivation is like the kindling, right? The small wood that you chop up in little pieces. And then it gets the flame going, okay? But you can't keep a fire going on kindling. Of course, it's going to burn out pretty quick. What you need to do is you need to start stacking in larger wood, right, to keep the fire going. And so I want you to think about the idea of motivation as kindling, small pieces of wood, little branches, scraps, all that stuff. But I want you to think about disciplines as like the log and the fire. Because once you have that log in the fire and the fire is already starting to go, you stick the log in and it catches fire, and it will keep that thing going for a long time. Then you can use that fire to cook, to keep yourself warm, and you can reap all the benefits of that raging fire. And it's so much easier to keep the flame going when you have those logs in it. And that is also true for our disciplines. When we set things in place, when we have strong disciplines developed, life is just a lot easier. Things happen on autopilot. Things, goals that you set are much easier to attain. And so that's a little bit of the difference. Now, another way the two are different, well, motivation is like the spark that gets you excited and eager to do something. That is that feeling that drives you forward. And it's usually triggered by like a new goal or rewards or inspiration. You see, motivation often gives you a bit of a dopamine hit. Now, discipline, on the other hand, is the steady and consistent effort you put in, even when the initial motivation fades away. It's the self-control and the commitment to keep going and sticking to a routine and overcoming obstacles to achieve your goals. So while motivation can start things off, it's discipline is what really sustains your progress. So disciplines are really the backbone of long-term success. I want you to remember this. Motivation is doing the thing because of how you feel, and discipline is doing it regardless of how you feel. But very, very different, right? So the word motivation is actually a combination of two words. It's motive and action. And in order to be motivated, we need a motive or a reason, and we need to take action, right? The problem with motivation is that it's wayward. As I said, it comes and goes. It's like the shifting wind. It's fickle. It's moody. It's inconsistent. So we must wean ourselves off of this need for motivation. That can no longer be our excuse for our actions or our inactions. We must learn to act despite how we feel. And here's the reality. As long as you are driven by motivation and driven by your feelings, you will never be consistent in achieving all the things you want. You must shift into an action-based, discipline-based mindset. And so last year, when I was working with a guy in the gym and I was training him, we were talking a little bit about this. And on the way out of the gym in the morning, he had asked me, how do you know when your motivation has turned into a discipline? How do you know when your desires have turned into like a well-formed habit? And it was an interesting thought and an interesting question. And here's how I answered, and here's how I want you to think about it. So you've all probably been in a situation where perhaps you've made a goal that you're going to get up and you're going to go to the gym early in the morning, you're going to get up and you're going to read, or whatever the case is. You know, we all know that struggle with the alarm clock, that relationship with the alarm clock. Now, when you are simply just motivated to do something and your alarm clock goes off and you know that you should be getting up, and what happens? You get this internal discussion, this internal dialogue, this reasoning you begin to have with yourself. Okay, well, then you start saying, well, I could sleep just 5 more minutes and then I could still squeeze in that time to get the workout in. Or if I just sleep for 15 more minutes, that'll still give me 45 minutes to read, and you start negotiating time. And then before you know it, you push it. And then, of course, it's too late. You push snooze, you fell back to sleep. And then you feel kind of like you failed and you just move on. But for me, I notice that my motivations and my feelings and stuff have kind of turned into a bit of a routine or a discipline or a habit, if you will, when I stop having that negotiation with myself. When I stop having that internal dialogue and I stop questioning the alarm clock and I stop questioning the amount of minutes I can trade and leverage. When I just automatically just get up and then I start doing my thing without questioning, that is a sign for me that I have shifted from simply wanting to do something and formed a habit or a discipline. So for example, that's after that same conversation, like a week later, I had woken up from my sleep. I turned off my alarm. I went downstairs, made a coffee, packed my gym bag, went to the gym, and I parked my car, and I got out of my car. When I saw the gym, I snapped into a conscious thought of like, how did I even get here? And what had happened was it just had become, all these actions leading up to me going to the gym had all of a sudden become subconscious, and I wasn't even thinking about it. At that point, I knew that this was a discipline that had started to take root and be formed in my life because I had begun doing this subconsciously. There was no more argument with myself. There was no more fighting with the alarm clock. I just simply did it. And the internal dialogue turned into, this is who I am. This is what I do. I don't question it anymore. I just get up and I go to the gym because I am an active person. There was no other option in your mind. So when this begins to shift, this is how you know you've moved from simply being motivated to becoming disciplined in an area and having it become a part of who you are. Okay? I love this quote from Napoleon Hill. He says this, I think if there's one thing that people need more than all other things combined, it is discipline over self. How little attention most people give to that great subject. And if you know anything about Napoleon Hill, he's a pretty smart dude. And in other words, he was saying the power to act despite how you feel is an incredible power. Now, in order to take action, you have to become aware of what you're doing consciously and also what you're doing subconsciously, because you do a lot of things subconsciously. And as we've discussed in previous episodes, it's around 95% of our thoughts and our decisions every single day are subconscious. That means that many times in our life, things happen to us and we react and adjust without ever really consciously thinking about it. And while this is an astonishing function of our brain, which is brilliant, it can also have a fairly negative impact if we're not careful about what we're doing. Because we can make one bad decision, and then we can develop a trigger and a cue for it, reward ourselves, and then subconsciously begin to form new neural pathways without even realizing we did it, right? So for example, you're at a party. This is what happened to a friend of mine. He was at a party and somebody had a pack of smokes and he went outside and he had a cigarette because he just wanted to try it out. And then later on, he was drinking a little bit more and then he went outside, didn't even think about it. He just said, yeah, I'll try one. The next morning, he woke up and he found himself wanting a cigarette. His roommate was a smoker, so he asked his roommate for a cigarette. That was 20 years ago, and he still wrestles with smoking. The same thing happens with food habits, with any other kind of habits we form or addictions we form, because what happens is we make one simple decision, and our brain starts to form associations around this, which we'll get into a little bit later. In his book, Essentialism, the author Greg McKeown writes this: "The danger is that without being fully aware, we can get caught up in non-essential habits, like checking our email the second we get out of bed every morning, or picking up a donut on the way home from work each day, or spending our lunch hour trolling the internet instead of using time to think, reflect, recharge, and connect with our friends and our colleagues." And really what this means is that this is essential that we get intentional about our thoughts and our actions and learn to take control of our lives. See, we must take the power back and go from slave to master in these areas of our lives, because as we've been learning, we can easily let things get out of control. And why is that so important? Because whether you like it or not, it is impossible for us as humans to be in stasis. What that means, it's impossible for us to be the same. We are always changing for the better or for the worst. We often think about the good habits we want to start, but we think less often about the bad ones that we have or that we are starting to form subconsciously. For example, we can hope for and wish all day for good habits like working out, saving money, dating our spouse, whatever the case is, but we don't often think about the idea of kicking habits, like drinking a little too much, or spending those 3 hours a day watching Netflix, or emotionally eating after we've had a hard day at work, or compulsively purchasing, retail therapy. But listen, you can be rest assured that you are never in stasis. Like I said, you're never not changing, because every decision you make is making you stronger or making you weaker. And this concept really blew my mind first when I came to grips with it, because from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed, you are constantly making decisions. Some great ones, some okay ones, some poor ones. And as we know, decisions repeated over time form habits. And you know how the old saying goes, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, because decisions can become slippery slopes that can set our life on a completely different trajectory. We've all seen that analogy or that map where a ship sets sail, but it's off course by 1 degree. And by the time it crosses the ocean, it lands in a port in an entirely different country. A 1% shift can change a lot over the course of time. Now, this might sound intense, but let me give you an example. We've probably all known someone that's had some type of moral failure, had somebody that's slept around on their spouse or whatever the case is. But an affair starts with one glance, with one thought, with one text message, with one meeting. Like a man doesn't just wake up and decide that he's going to sleep with another woman. It starts with the glance across the room or that text message or that really thoughtful coffee delivery. And then it becomes, having lunch together in public. And then it becomes dinner alone. And then it becomes hanging out alone in the evenings and having deep, intimate conversations. And then before you know it, you're in her bed, right? This is how it works. Same thing with weight gaining, for example. You don't just wake up one day 30 pounds heavier. It starts with one small decision at a time. It starts with, you're driving home from work. You had a hard day, so you think you're going to go to the drive-thru and just grab a cheeseburger. You're going to reward yourself. And then again, the next day, you think, I need to reward myself again. And then the next day, and before you know it, it becomes a bit of a high point where you can't wait to get off work to get into the drive-thru to get the cheeseburger to make you feel better. One decision, day after day, and then boom, you wake up a year later and you're 30 pounds overweight. What happened? It started with that one decision you made. We all have a moment where we realize what happened. And in lots of different situations, we have these moments, these sobering moments where we wake up and maybe the question is, how is my marriage falling apart? How did we get here? How have I gained this weight? How have I been making all this money this year and I'm still broke? Well, it happens one poor decision at a time. And most often than not, it happens without you even thinking about it. In fact, sometimes it happens because you're not thinking about it. So listen, if you take away anything from this episode so far, I want it to be this, that you are always moving in a direction. You're either moving forward or you're moving backward. Your marriage is either getting better or it's deteriorating. You are either making healthier decisions and you're improving your health or you're not improving your health. There is no way to be completely in stasis. So the question becomes, what direction are your habits leading you into? So now let's get into it. How to form great habits, okay? Hey, real quick, we're going to get back to the episode, but I want to give you a free gift today. So if you're here and you're listening to this and you have been having a hard time in your marriage, maybe you and your wife just feel like really great roommates. You haven't had fun in a long time. You're just kind of getting caught up in chores and the to-do list and dropping the kids off and picking them up. I've got something called the Roommate Remedy, which is a free PDF. It's a guide for you. It's 113 ways to have fun with your wife and spark intimacy again. And this guide is going to teach you and your wife. They're going to give you a ton of different ways to have fun. So that's totally free for you. Listen, if you're watching on YouTube, I'm going to have the link in the comment section below. But if you're listening on audio, just hit up dadnationcode.com/remedy for this free guide for you. Listen, I believe in the marriage model. I believe in you and your wife. You can do this. I'm rooting for you. All right, let's get back to the episode. As I said, this is largely based off of the content written by James Clear, but in the very beginning of his book, he wrote this sentence, and I love it. It says, "The quality of our lives often depends on the quality of our habits." So we're going to talk a little bit about something called environment design. I talked about this loosely in an episode, I believe episode number 3 with Adam Bro, about when it comes to getting control over our food and different things, trying to build habits and going to the gym. But essentially, environment design is the idea that your surroundings and the things you interact with on a daily basis can greatly influence your behavior and your habits. It's about arranging your physical and mental environment in a way that makes it easier for you to make positive choices and stick to your goals. So I want you to think about your environment as a set of triggers and cues that prompt you to take certain actions. Right? So for example, if you want to eat healthier, you could redesign your kitchen in a way so that healthy snacks are more visible and more easily accessible, while less healthy options are tucked away in the back of the pantry. This way, when you're hungry or looking for a snack, you're more likely to reach for something more nutritious. Another example could be if you want to read more books, you could place a book on your bedside rather than your phone, making it more likely that you're going to pick up the book before you go to bed rather than picking up your phone and mindlessly scrolling through social media. In essence, environment design is about making the good habits you want to develop more obvious, more convenient, and attractive, while making the bad habits you want to avoid being less tempting and accessible. By intentionally shaping and designing your environment, you set yourself up for success to make it easier to stick to the changes you want to make in your life. So another example of this is one thing that I've done in the past is I wanted to start drinking more water. I made a goal to drink a gallon of water a day. So the only thing that was around me was my mug of coffee. And if you know anything about coffee, coffee doesn't hydrate you. It's a diuretic. It actually dehydrates you. And so in order to design my environment to optimize, my chances for success, number one, I did a couple of things. Number one, I bought a big water jug from Amazon. And if you know me, you've probably seen it. You've seen me carrying it around. So that's 2 liters. And then I started putting water glasses all around my house. Like I put a water glass on my office desk. I put a water glass in the kitchen, one on my bedside table, because if it is around me, I will drink it. But if it's not in my immediate sight, I will not drink it, right? So this is a practical example of how I designed my environment to be more conducive to reaching my goal of drinking more water, okay? So that's a little bit about environment design. So the number one thing that you want to do is to start thinking about what habit you want to form, and then start designing your environment for that. Okay, so number 2, the thing we're going to talk about is something called a feedback loop. Now, this feedback loop consists of 4 stages: cue, craving, response, and reward. Okay, cue, craving, response, reward. So we're going to explore each stage in detail here, okay? So number 1, the cue. The cue is a trigger or a signal that prompts you to take action. It can be something external like an alarm clock or a notification, or it can also be an internal cue such as a feeling or a thought, right? Cues can vary depending on the habit that you want to develop or change. A cue in the feedback loop refers to a trigger or a signal that prompts you to take a certain action. It's something that catches your attention and initiates this behavior. So, an example of a cue in the feedback loop could be the sound of your phone's notification going off, which prompts you to pick up your phone and check your messages. Or a cue could be the vibrating sensation you feel in your pocket when your phone goes off. Okay, so that's number 1, cue. Number 2, craving. A craving refers to the desire or longing that's generated in response to that cue, leading to an execution of that particular habit, right? It's the feeling that drives you to take action and complete that routine in order to receive the anticipated reward. Because cravings are often influenced by factors like anticipation, pleasure, or the need to relieve discomfort, okay? So they provide the necessary energy to focus to initiate the behavior. So using that phone analogy, the cue would be the vibration or the notifications, and the craving would be an instant desire for validation or affirmation. So for example, you might feel the phone buzz or get the notification, and you might be instantly asking yourself, how many likes did my photo get that I posted? Or what did she say in that text? Or so on and so forth. We all know that feeling. And here's another interesting point about that. That moment between the cue and the craving, that is where we feel a surge of dopamine. This question of what's on the other side of that notification? Because when we're wondering and we haven't yet found out, that's when we get that surge of dopamine. What could it be? And we get addicted to that wondering, that sensation of what's on the other side of that notification. And in so many other scenarios in life, we get that as well. But it's interesting to note that this is when dopamine sort of floods our system. This is another reason why we can be so addicted to checking our social media or checking our emails or our text messages. Okay, so that's a craving. So now the third is response. So the response is the action or the behavior you take in response to the cue and to the craving. It can be a positive habit that you want to reinforce or a negative habit that you want to break. The response can be physical, mental, or emotional, depending on the nature of that habit. So for example, consider the habit of going for a run every single morning, okay? The cue would be seeing your running shoes and your workout clothes that you set out the night before. Then the craving would be this desire to feel energized and accomplished. Now your response would actually be the action of tying up your sneakers, heading out the door, right? In this context, the response is a physical activity of running that you engage in as a result of the cue and the craving. It's the behavior that you carry out to satisfy the desire created by the cue and the craving that ultimately leads to the reward, which is feeling energized, feeling accomplished, like you did the things you said you would do, right? So now let's move on to reward, the fourth of the cycle. The reward is either the outcome of good habits or the consequence of bad habits of your behavior, right? So it can be immediate or delayed, it can be tangible or it can be intangible, but rewards create a sense of satisfaction and reinforce the association between the cue, the craving, and the response. So positive rewards make it more likely for the habit to be repeated in the future, while negative rewards can discourage the behavior. So if we're going to continue using this analogy or this example of going for a run, the cue would be seeing the sneakers and the workout clothes that you set out the night before. The craving could be that desire to feel energized and accomplished. The response would be actually going for the run, and the reward would be feeling energized, accomplished, and experiencing that release of endorphins after you work out. So the positive outcome reinforces the habit of going for a run in the morning, which makes you more likely to repeat that behavior the next time you encounter the cue and the associated craving. So this feedback loop is a cyclical process where each stage influences and reinforces the next, right? It's a loop. And if you listen to episode number 2, where I talked about how to gain self-confidence and become more confident and kick insecurities, I talked about something called the confidence-competence loop when learning to become more confident. And it looks a very similar way. It acts a very similar way. And so when this loop repeats consistently, it strengthens the neural pathways in your brain that are associated with the habit because of the concept of neuroplasticity. Now, if you've never heard of neuroplasticity, I might actually do another podcast episode of this at some point, but you can actually rewire your brain, right? So basically what happens is when you decide to do something different, a new action or new decision, your brain begins to form new train tracks, if you will, or paths in your brain. And as the more times you do them, the deeper they become entrenched in your brain, and that can actually physically change your brain and change how you think and change how you act. And this is how we can literally change who we are, what we can do, how much we learn or read or whatever the case is. So this concept of neuroplasticity, once you can understand it and harness it, is pretty incredible. So thanks to this feedback loop and this concept of neuroplasticity, we can make our actions more automatic and more ingrained over time. This is how we change our brains. This is why it's so important to intentionally think about how you will design your environment and create intentional cues, cravings, and rewards to shape desirable habits. By understanding and optimizing each stage of the feedback loop, you can effectively establish positive habits and break negative ones, leading to massive personal growth and improvement. So we've given examples of how the feedback loop works with implementing good habits, but here's some examples of how it works when we form bad habits through a negative feedback loop. So, for example, if you're someone who has a bad habit of procrastination, the cue might be sitting down to do work on a challenging task that you don't want to do. The craving would be you'd be starting to feel overwhelmed or unsure where to begin. The response to that feeling would be engaging in distracting activities like checking social media, watching YouTube, whatever the case is. And the reward would be the momentary escape from that discomfort or the task, but ultimately prolonging the time it takes you to complete it and potentially feeling guilty or stressed afterward, right? So another example would be mindlessly snacking, if that's a challenge for you. The cue might be feeling bored or feeling stressed, right? That could be a cue. And then all of a sudden, when you become bored and stressed, all of a sudden your brain starts sending you craving signals, which is a desire for a quick and easy source of comfort or distraction. So your response to that craving is to grab a bag of chips or a box of cookies and mindlessly just chow down. And the reward is that temporary pleasure or distraction from those negative emotions. But unfortunately, that often leads to unhealthy eating patterns and weight gain, right? But you need to remember the concept of neuroplasticity in this context, because when you do this, you're actually rewriting a response in your brain, and you're rewriting your brain to think cookies equal feeling better, right? This happens all the time as kids. You come home after a hard day at school, or maybe you had a difficult time with your friend, and you come home and your mom says, "Oh, here's a cookie to feel better." Right? I'm going to take you out for ice cream to make you feel better because you had a hard day. And while this is good intentions, what happens is it sets us up to start forming these cues and cravings and rewards, and it teaches us from a young age that when we feel bad, the way to make it feel better is by eating, right? This happened to me as a child. This happens to several people. And so this is important on our parenting journey as well. Now that we understand what happens and how we make associations, it's important for you to think about how often you use this with your children so that they don't form behaviors that make it more difficult for them to eat well and not eat emotionally. The last example I'll give you is the context of smoking, which I talked about a little bit earlier. The cue would be seeing someone else smoking, or maybe you're feeling stressed. Then the craving could be experiencing a nicotine withdrawal if you're already addicted, or seeking some type of stress relief. The response, of course, would be lighting a cigarette and smoking. Then the reward would be that temporary relief from the nicotine hit, the relief from the stress. But unfortunately, with that, of course, you're risking long-term health consequences and addictions. But these examples demonstrate how the feedback loop can contribute to the reinforcement of negative habits. So understanding and identifying these cues, cravings, responses, and rewards associated with bad habits can help you break free from their grip and replace them with healthier alternatives. By modifying each stage of the feedback loop, you can create a more positive and beneficial cycle that supports your personal growth and your well-being. So remember this: cue, craving, response, reward. CCRR. Say it over and over to yourself a few times. I do this often, and it helps me remember, be aware of the decisions that I'm making and the decisions I'm not making, or be aware of some of the things that maybe I'm doing on autopilot. Cue, craving, response, reward. I love this quote from Roy Amara, and was often associated to Bill Gates, but I believe Roy was the first person to say it. He said this: "Most people overestimate what they can achieve in a year and underestimate what they can achieve in 10 years. Now, Roy was a Stanford computer scientist, and this is one of my favorite quotes because it's so significant, because you can completely change the trajectory of your life simply by tweaking your habits one by one, day over day, 1% at a time. And I promise you, within a year, you would be unrecognizable." So with that, we've talked about some real straightforward tips on how to form good habits. Now we're going to talk about how to kick bad habits, okay? Because just as the good habits have a format we can use, so do the bad habits. So we can essentially reverse the process and create practical steps to kick bad habits. Okay, so if you're listening to this and you have some bad habits that you're trying to kick, whether it's an addiction or procrastination, food, porn, alcohol, whatever the case is, fill in the blank with whatever it is you're trying to kick and give up. I want you to put this into context. Grab a pen, grab a device you can take notes on, because there are some points here on how you can modify the habit so that you can get rid of it for good. Okay? So number one is make the habit invisible. Make the habit invisible. Now, what this means is you need to reduce exposure to the cues that trigger the bad habit. So, for example, if you want to stop mindlessly snacking, keep the unhealthy snacks out of sight or remove them from your environment altogether. Make it invisible, okay? Number 2, you could make the habit unattractive. So you can associate negative consequences with the bad habit to reduce its appeal. So for example, if you want to quit smoking, picture your kids without a father. Think about that ashtray mouth you get from smoking. Take a good hard look at some of the images on these packs of cigarettes. Do what you need to do to make this habit unattractive. Number 3, make the habit difficult. So you need to increase the effort required to engage in that bad habit. So for example, if you want to spend less time on social media, delete the apps from your phone or use web blockers to limit your access. And this will set at least one barrier in your way, and that will give you time to think about what you're doing and make a subconscious activity conscious, because you actually have to actively think about how to hack the software or to reinstall the app. And that might just be enough to kick you into gear to think, maybe I shouldn't be doing this, right? The 4th, make the habit unsatisfying. So for example, on the iPhone, a little hack for you, there's something called a grayscale filter. And you can turn on this grayscale filter on your iPhone, and will turn your iPhone into like a black and white screen. And I promise you, my friend, you will find your phone to be so boring, because it'll feel like you're reading a newspaper, and you will instantly feel less desire to be scrolling Instagram. The pictures look way more boring with black and white. Text messages look way more boring black and white. All the games, they're just no fun. That is a way that you can make that habit unsatisfying, all right? And if you want to know how to do that, just Google how to turn on my grayscale filter on my iPhone. Number 5 is to replace the bad habit with a better habit. So identify an alternative behavior that can fulfill the same underlying craving or provide similar rewards. So for example, if you tend to snack when you're stressed, replace it with a healthier coping mechanism, like deep breathing exercises or going for a short walk. Or maybe you can swap out the potato chips for popcorn, which is lower in calories, So replace the habit with a better habit. And then number 6, I believe we're at number 6, is to practice habit tracking. Monitor your progress by keeping track of your habits. Use a habit tracker or a journal to record when you successfully avoid the habit or engage in the desired habit. This helps create self-awareness and holds you accountable. So for example, whenever I have a new fitness goal, whenever I'm training for something, or I want to lose a certain amount of fat or gain muscle, I will start I'll start a spreadsheet. I'll open up a notes app on my phone, and I'll start tracking the numbers that I'm lifting at the gym, so that I can make sure that I'm incrementally increasing to make sure that I'm getting stronger or I'm losing the fat tissue that I set out to lose. Becoming accountable to that document, tracking that habit, makes it so much easier for me to get the results I want. Number 7, engage in habit shaping. So you can gradually adjust the cues and cravings and responses and rewards associated with the bad habit. So you can make small changes over time and create a new and healthier habit pattern. So for example, a small modification. If you normally have 2 scoops of ice cream every night, just have 1, right? Instead of smoking 10 cigarettes a day, try smoking 8. Put whatever habit you have in there and see if you can slightly shape that habit to change it up a little bit. And the last one is to establish a supportive environment. This is the most impacting, in my opinion, and that's to surround yourself with people who encourage and support your efforts to kick these bad habits. So seek out communities or individuals who have similar goals and can provide guidance and accountability. Shameless plug here for the Dad Nation Coalition, an initiative that I started with a small group of men, 12 men or less, who I journey with, and where we have an open dialogue, access to one another, holding each other accountable, and so that we can encourage one another, support one another to form the habits that we've said that we wanted to form, and to kick the bad habits that we said we wanted to kick, and then reach the goals that we wanted to reach. Now, we've talked about how to form great habits, how to kick bad habits, and this is all fine and good. But what happens when you've started the process of forming a new habits and you're starting to get discouraged. We've set New Year's resolutions and it's January 29 or February. Maybe you made it all the way to March and you're just starting to feel kind of discouraged. What happens when you feel that way? What happens when you just want to jump ship on it all? Here's a couple concepts I want to talk to you about when you start feeling that way, and a couple things that can encourage you. Okay, number one is something called Kanter's Law. And if you've never heard of Kanter's Law, it's named after the Harvard professor Rosabeth Moss Kanter. And this is a simple yet powerful concept that essentially states that everything can look like a failure in the middle, right? So in other words, when you're in the midst of a complex project, a significant change, or a new task, it's common, it's very, very common to encounter challenges and setbacks that might make it seem like things are falling apart all around you. However, this phase is often temporary, and if you preserve and continue working at it, you can overcome the obstacles and eventually reach your goal. Now, if you're watching on YouTube, I've got an image here that shows the Kanter's Law on a timeline and how it works. But see, Kanter's Law reminds us that the journey to success is often messy, but with determination, we can navigate through difficulties and emerge victorious. We've all been there. We've started a habit. We're motivated. We're like all in. And then all of a sudden it gets difficult and we descend into the chaos and we begin to question why we even thought that this was a good idea in the first place. And in this moment, when there doesn't seem to be a light at the end of the tunnel, that's when we jump ship. But oftentimes, this is where you really need to buckle down and get focused. And with some new infusion of confidence or behaviors or just consistency in general, you can emerge out of that chaos like a phoenix rising from the ashes and form that new habit. It just takes time. And I love this quote from Rosabeth Kanter herself. She wrote, "Everything looks like a failure in the middle. In nearly every change project, doubt is cast on the original vision because problems are mounting and the end is nowhere in sight." So when you're in the middle of that black tunnel and you can't see the light, when you want to snack, to spend, to smoke, to sleep, whatever the case is, I want you to remember Kanter's Law and that it is not supposed to feel great in this moment. Here's the reality. At the end of the day, if we're truly honest with ourselves, deep down, we instinctively know what we should do. We know the right decision to make, but we don't often do it. For example, if you're trying to get out of debt, you know that Amazon purchase isn't necessary. If you're trying to get in shape and lose weight, you know that extra piece of chocolate cake isn't helping. If you're trying to restore your marriage, we instinctively know deep down that it's going to require a ton of work and it's going to require us to make sacrifices. But why don't we do it? Well, this Solomon's paradox explains this and why it happens to most everybody. And the paradox is simply that we can see solutions to other people's problems more clearly than our own. Now, this was named after King Solomon because he was known to be one of the wealthiest and wisest men of all time. However, there was a paradox because even though he gave incredible advice and led nations, his own personal life was a mess. And this paradox has actually been studied many times psychologically. Case study after case study, they would take subjects who were struggling either in like financial crisis, domestic abuse cases, or obesity, and they would document the stories of these people, and then they would whitewash their names, and then they would repeat these scenarios to these people without knowing who they're talking about, and they would ask that person to give advice for that hypothetical person in that situation. And every time and time again, they give the exact correct advice on how to get out of debt, how to break free from the abusive relationship, how to lose that weight, or any subject matter that they put in there. Now, why does that happen? Why do the very people that are struggling with these issues but then are removed and asked for advice can then give the advice they need, but they can't apply it to themselves? This happens because we can look at other people's lives through a telescope and see really far ahead and give really clear and objective advice. But when we look at our own lives, we view it with a microscope instead of a telescope. And what happens is we overanalyze, we scrutinize over silly details, and we lose sight of what matters most. And instead of looking at the forest, we start looking at the trees, or even the weeds in the trees. And we so often can experience paralysis by analysis, so we either make the wrong decision or we make no decision at all. And this is what we do all the time. And here's the reality. It's one thing to know what a good decision is, but it's another thing to be able to make that decision for yourself. So how do we hack Solomon's principle? How do we stop ourselves from overanalyzing and making the wrong decisions? Because at the end of the day, if we do instinctually know what we need to do, if we're being completely honest with ourselves, how do we get past that filter? And here is one question that has been a game changer for me. Okay, you take that struggle and you fill in this question. What would a blank person do? So contextualize this question with an area that you're trying to form a good habit in. So for example, if you're trying to be more fit, more active, you would ask yourself in this situation, when you're trying to get out of bed, or maybe you're trying to get motivation to go to the gym, ask yourself, what would a fit person do? If you're trying to be a more calm person, ask yourself in the moment, what would a patient person do right now? If you're trying to be a better husband, ask, what would a great husband do right now? When you're coming home from work and you put your bags down, you come into the house, ask yourself that question, what would a great husband do? If you want to be a better dad, in the heat of the moment, ask yourself, what would an amazing dad do? Now, when you ask yourself this question, the answer becomes obvious. Because in the context of being a great dad, you know what you need to do. So when you come into the house and you ask yourself that question, you're going to put your phone down. You're going to sit on the floor with your kid. You're going to ask about their day. You're going to play with them. Now, why does this framework work so well? Well, it works for two different reasons. As mentioned, it helps us stop overanalyzing, and it helps us get out of our head about each decision we have to make. And number two, it helps you shift your identity and how you see yourself, aligning your actions with the actions of the person you want to become. Or in other words, it helps you get at your core and change your identity. So the graduation from that question then becomes, I am a fit person, and this is what I do. Or I am a patient person, and this is what I do. Or I am a good husband, so this is what I do. So that question allows you to slowly make the right decisions, and then you can wrap some identity around that and say, this is who I am. This is what I do. It's no longer a conversation, and there's no longer a discussion or a struggle. Now, another way to increase your chances of kicking that bad habit or to forming a new one is to make a goal a little less intense, okay? Something that's a little bit more attainable. Because listen, we're chronic overcommitters, and we make goals that are way too big, and ultimately we set ourselves up for failure. For example, if I had $1 for every time I heard somebody say, I'm going to lose 50 pounds in 2 months, or I'm going to start working out, I'm going to go to the gym 6 days a week, or I'm going to start pursuing my wife, I'm going to take my wife out on 4 dates this week with my wife. Great intentions, right? For sure, great intentions. But why is this a problem? Because if we don't follow through with these big, audacious goals, we're going to inevitably break that commitment we made with ourselves, and then we're going to reinforce that already existing lack of belief that we have. And this results in less confidence that we ever had before in ourselves. And again, in episode 2, I talk a little bit about the problem with what happens in that scenario where you erode your trust in yourself and you erode the rapport you have with yourself, because this actually puts you back further and makes it even more difficult to form good habits. So how do we combat this? How do we stop ourselves from making big, audacious goals and habits and setting ourselves up for failure? Well, we want to ask ourselves this question: what's the MVP required to see success in this area? Now, the MVP stands for what's the minimum viable progress. In the software world, the minimum viable product, which is an MVP, this is basically the most simple form of software design that you can release to use to test. It's like a beta version, and it's like, this is the bare bones. What do I essentially need to develop to get this off the ground? In the context of habits, it's minimum viable progress. So we can ask ourselves, what's the smallest amount of progress that will be useful to the essential task we're trying to get done, or the habit that we're trying to make? And this is a great concept to adapt when it comes to considering how to change our behaviors and our habits over time. What is the smallest and most sustainable change that we can make? So let's do it and then prove to ourselves that we can do it, and stack a win and begin to build confidence and make another change and another small change and another small change, right? So in the context of your family, what's something small that I can do right now to grow my relationships with my wife, with my kids, with my friends? Or in the context of your fitness, what's the most minimal step I can take right now that will increase my progress? Maybe that's something as simple as not drinking soda anymore, or replacing it with diet soda or sparkling water, whatever the case is. Or maybe it's just increasing your water by 2 glasses a day, or committing to, 3,000 steps instead of 2,000. Because taking any action, big or small, is better than taking no action. I love this quote from Dale Carnegie. He says this: action greases the wheel of life, and inaction breeds doubt and fear. Action breeds confidence and courage. And if you want to conquer fear, do not sit at home and think about it. Go out and think about it. So the key to progress is to simply take action, whether it's a big action or a simple one. Don't allow things like Kanter's law or Solomon's paradox to get at you and discourage you from continuing forward with your goals. Okay, so now we're winding down to the last part of our episode, but we've talked about how to form great habits, how to kick bad habits, and what to do when we're feeling discouraged, what to do when we feel like quitting. And we talked about actions and the importance of actions, but it's important because actions lead to accomplishments, right? So another guy that I was training at the gym last year, we developed a little bit of a phrase that we would say, average actions, average results, or no actions, no results. And we would see people in the gym, and over the course of 6 months, 8 months, they would come to the gym and they would kind of work out, just put half an effort in. They grab a cheeseburger after the workout, whatever the case is. And 6 months later, a year later, there's no real difference. There's no real transformation. There's no real change because the input or the actions have been kind of average. And so the results that they got were average. And so if you want big results, you need to take big action. Another quote from Aristotle. Famous Aristotle, he says this: we become just by performing just actions, temperate by performing temperate actions, and we become brave by performing brave actions. And here's the reality: you can change, and you must change. If you're here and you have bad habits, or you're not satisfied with where you are in life, because your family depends on it. The trajectory of your life and your family's lives will be forever changed by the decisions you make for yourself today. Think about that. So if you listen to all of this and you're still feeling discouraged, and you still feel like maybe you don't have the courage to take the steps that you need to take to kick the bad habit or start the good habit, or you don't feel qualified, I want you to remember this. This is a quote from James Clear that will give some sobering perspective. He says this: don't feel qualified? Nobody does. You can only be qualified to do that which you have already accomplished or trained for. Anything new is accomplished by unqualified people. Anything new is accomplished by unqualified people. Think about that. Everything new has been accomplished by unqualified people. So don't wait to be confident. Just do the thing. And as I've said in previous episodes, confidence is a result, not a requirement. You're not required to have confidence to form this habit. Confidence will come as a result from forming the habit. And remember this in the heat of the moment: there's only going to be you that can do this. Nobody's coming for you to help you with this. And I know this isn't comforting, but you have to remember that. No one's going to take the TV remote from you. Your kids aren't going to pry the phone from your hands. No one's going to take away that cheeseburger on your drive home. No one's going to set up that monthly budget for you and question all your Amazon purchases. At some point, you have to take ownership of your life and take action in the ways that you need to. It's important to learn how to act despite how you feel, like we started off this entire episode. Another quote from Aristotle, he says this: "It is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it." In other words, you can act despite your thoughts and your fears. And the last thought I want to leave you with is this, and I talk about this often, but as men, as fathers, as husbands, I love this idea that we are constantly writing a new chapter in our book. Our lives are a book. And each day we get the opportunity to wake up and write a new chapter. And the beautiful thing about that is tomorrow is a new chance. Tomorrow there's more grace for a new opportunity to write a different chapter tomorrow. But here's the thing. Every single season you go through, you're writing chapters. And at the end of your life, all those chapters are going to make a book. And that book will have a theme. But when you die, your kids will read that book that you wrote, the chapters, the book of your life. They're going to read the chapters. They're going to share stories of the life that you lived, the man that you were, the chapters you wrote. What is going to be the theme of that book? Because they're going to learn how to write their chapters based off of how you wrote yours. And so if you think about that, what chapter are you writing today? Is it a chapter of a lack of discipline? Is it a chapter of addiction? Is it a chapter of a lack of control? Or is it a chapter of resiliency, of someone who overcomes obstacles, or somebody who buckles down and is a man of their word, has authenticity and character and nobility? I want you to think about that question as you make these decisions about your year coming up. What kind of chapter are you writing today? And if you were to die tomorrow, what would be the theme? What would be the narrative of the book that you wrote? Because people will read that book, and your children will write books similar to the book that you wrote. And lastly, I got some questions for you to consider as you go, okay? Number one, have you been relying on motivation to form good habits? If you have, it's time to stop waiting and relying on motivation because it is fleeting, all right? Number two, is there an area in your life that you've become complacent in, that you've settled for average in your life? And number three, in this context of us never being able to be in stasis, in the areas of your life, whether it's marriage, finances, your fitness, is there a part of your life that you just kind of assume that you were coasting, but is actually subconsciously slowly degrading? Pay attention to that, because remember, if you're not growing, you're dying in some way. Number four, what bad habit or vice have you been willfully ignoring, or maybe just doing on the subconscious? And number five, what good habit or discipline do you know that you need to start today or to get better at? And if you're watching on YouTube, I want to hear from you, okay? So listen, I want you to answer this question. What step are you going to take today? What thing can you commit to doing today that will set you on a great trajectory to either form great habits or kick bad habits moving into the future, okay? Leave in the comments below, because I want to know what action step you're going to take so I can encourage you. Okay, so that's all for today, but I want to remind you of next week's episode. Okay, I talk with Dr. Nate Klemp from 80/80 Marriage. This guy's a New York Times best-selling author. He's a doctor. He's a brilliant man in the context of relationships and marriage. And we talk about marriage, how to have a successful marriage, the value of marriage, how to grow together instead of growing apart. He gives some incredible insights and real practical tips on how you can level up in your life and your love. You will not want to miss this episode next week, my friends. Okay, I hope this episode was powerful for you. I hope I've given you enough practical tips. And listen, as always, I am in your corner, my friend. Reach out to me if you need anything. My email address is mitchell@dadnationco.com, or you can hit me up on Instagram @dadnationco. I would love to connect with you and to hear more about your story, your journey, okay? I believe in you. Let's get after it. See ya.